A lot of people are distracted by talking about the budget, but I'm still not happy with the way things have gone about. Southport, because to me Southport was a tipping point. It was a result of decades of being gaslit by the media and the successive governments, not just Keir Starmer's. The Tories were bad enough. And I say being gaslit because of the way they handle things like grooming gangs. It's a phenomenon and their origins are clear, but it's never addressed or seldom addressed. GB News have done a little bit about it, but the other channels, you'd think it didn't exist. It's a separate phenomenon of sexual activity, choosing victims, which are predominantly, if not 100%, young white girls and some boys, sadly. So the thing is, the argument they come back with is that, well, 90% of sexual offences are committed by white men, which is about correct. But then again, we are 95% of the population, so it should be expected. That correlates, doesn't it? So when you think that the amount of people who come from one particular origin of grooming gangs, 98% of those grooming gangs are from that origin, there's an imbalance, isn't there? And we're cushioned from the information. We have to seek it online. No one talks about it. Councillors, officials, politicians, the police, the courts, the judiciary system. No one wants to address that this is a very clear and real thing. And the thing it shows, it's like anything, it's like terror attacks. They show a complete disdain for our society. We are worthless to them, to these extremist thinkers. And I do see grooming gang members as being extremist because they're targeting one section of society. It's a section of society that's already been let down by the system and their own parents. It can't be any fun living in a cold, miserable house with a mother who's off her head on crack cocaine on the settee and you're looking for something to eat for your baby brother who's wandering around in a filthy nappy and all you've got is Cocoa Pops and cold water from the tap. That's not food. So when somebody comes by in their nice warm BMW with some hot takeaway food up for grabs, who's not going to be tempted on an empty stomach? Who's not going to get involved when someone actually shows kindness? And we never get to see that element of what's happened, the human element. This is the bit that interests me. Those girls are let down by members of their family and society in general. And they turned to people, not because they wanted sex, not because they wanted to particularly be passed around, multiple men, given drugs and drink, abused repeatedly. They didn't want that. They wanted kindness. That's what they wanted. That's what they were looking for. Some of them were 7, 8, 10, 11, 13, 14. These are desperately in need of affection and kindness. That's why they went in that direction. And unfortunately, predators behave in a way that they don't attract people by being horrible. They attract people by being nice, by saying nice things to them, by giving them hot food, somewhere to go during the day when they're cold. They reel them in. That's why it's called grooming. And the sad thing is that our society is plagued by people who don't respect it. And generally they are from overseas. Criminals are criminals. I'm not talking about the general population. I'm talking about why Southport kicked off. It kicked off because of years and years of us seeing what we see, knowing what we know, and being told to shut up. And sadly, nothing's changed. It's quite obvious from what we said at the time that the anger towards the Southport attacker was clearly justified. Despite the fact he was a generational immigrant, his parents had come here, the ideology he was attracted to was from overseas. He came from a place of great conflict, Rwanda. That's where the father came from. And unfortunately, this man, who was projected to us as a clean-cut schoolboy, pictures of which were used for children in need, as the BBC chose him as a poster boy. Could that company get anything else more wrong? So we're projected, we're told when the initial story breaks, we're given photographs of a small schoolboy. It's much more palatable to see a schoolboy. You think it's a strange child. But this was a grown man. This was a grown man who decided to stab a little girl in the face as she came out of the ladies' toilets. This was a conscious decision to go out and take lives. And lives have been ruined. The girls, their lives have been stopped dead. The attackers also ruined other lives, the ones that tried to protect them. And these individuals never get a mention. And it's the human side of it that I'm talking about. Because the journalists are so very sad. They just want their clickbait. They just want their day in the sun. They just want to have their expensive suits on and their lovely plain dresses and sit and give you news that isn't news at all. It's just opinion, and get you to believe them rather than seek the truth. And that's what we've been faced with Southport. The media, probably faced with restrictions from the government, who are basically still getting it wrong. What they did with Southport, Keir Starmer couldn't wait to come out on that podium and accuse everyone who was angry about the situation as being far right. Generally, they were just what I would call conservative thinking, people who have witnessed what's gone on with this country for decades and have just had enough, and some foolish enough to make statements on social media that maybe in 24 hours, 36 hours would have calmed down. Maybe if the government had decided to be more honest with the public, the tempers wouldn't have got so out of control. And bearing in mind, there were a few looters and rioters, and I do not condone that, I condemn it. But mixed amongst those were ordinary people who were protesting. One man arrested for violent disorder despite not doing anything violent, talked probably into a plea bargain by pleading guilty. And if you heard that interview on GB News with Michelle Dewberry, where one of the arrested, who was in a wheelchair with serious health conditions, was arrested and sent to jail. They put him on a second floor in the jail. He's in a wheelchair, so he couldn't access the yard for exercise. He couldn't get to his medicine. The treatment he got was abysmal, but he pleaded not guilty and he got out. But what I'm saying is this vicious reaction to people who were angry was out of control by the government. It's the government that showed lack of control. And the first thing they did was reassure the Muslim community that the mosques would be protected, despite the fact that most of the people, now that information unfolded after the fact about what this young man was doing, reading Al-Qaeda manuals and trying to create a biological weapon, the public were in fact right. But unfortunately, the media and the government chose to defend a section of society that were very quick to take to the street. They were very quick to show a sign of strength by marching through, I think it was Manchester, all these young men, as though they got something to defend they were proud of, when really what we were doing was saying, how can this go on? How can you keep letting people into the country that don't want to assimilate? Even 2 generations in, as Professor Matt Goodwin, and he's the boy with all the badges, he'll explain how this phenomenon happens, that they can literally be the offspring from earlier immigration and still have these leanings towards extremism. I've just watched Professor Matt Goodwin on his YouTube channel explaining his situation. What you've got to look at with people like Matt Goodwin is he could have kept his position as a college professor, taken the money like the rest of them and kept his mouth shut. But he didn't. He spoke out and he stood his ground. I've watched him on his clip. If you go on his YouTube channel, I'm very quick to recommend other people. I don't do this channel to put my name forward. I'm not bothered. I'm just a conduit because I'm doing this all the time, 24/7. So I might just see something before you, or I might be aware of something because of the groups I'm in and the contacts I've got, like journalists from GB News, like MPs that are actually half decent, and other characters like Lawrence Fox and Calvin and many more. So I do this because we need to know. And we need to know because you need to know. You don't need to think you're losing your marbles. You don't need to think you've got it wrong, and you don't need to think you're an isolated figure. That's why they call us the silent majority. Anyway, back to Matt Goodwin's excellent video. You'll know which one it is. It's a fairly recent one. I think it's his latest one. And he's stood in front of an empty room like he's going to start a lecture. He shows two clips there. One of them's with Mehdi Hassan from Al Jazeera, who's interviewing him about the Southport riots before the later information came out. The sad thing that I witnessed was the arrogance, which is how I interpret it, the arrogance and the intensity of Mehdi and the way he challenged what Matt Goodwin was trying to say, which was Matt Goodwin was trying to say, we have a problem in this country. We have a problem with who we're letting in and how we're letting them in. And this problem is going to unfold generations down the line, which clearly with the Southport attacker and other people that has. How many times have we seen people who have been granted asylum have turned out to be terrorists? The guy that did the Manchester Arena, he was an asylum seeker. He was second generation. What I found disappointing is that the guy, it was a very hostile audience. And this is why I admire Matt Goodwin so much, because he stands his ground. And the interviewer, he couldn't wait to chuck it over the net to Matt. He couldn't wait to interject. He didn't let him finish. He didn't let him finish his scientific point about it being a phenomenon and how the country has let us down, how Starmer has let us down. He couldn't wait to jump in and say, well, why are you saying that he is British? And he was saying it's not about were you born. It's basically about, do you respect the country? Do you behave British? I mean, clearly, doing these attacks, that's not behaving British. We know there are other criminals from our own background. They're just criminals. But they defended the Southport attacker so rigorously, just like the BBC. Just like they did with Hugh Edwards. They couldn't wait to come out and defend him. And then we realised this, on the surface, this respectable individual was getting it off looking at child porn. And when they discuss Hugh Edwards, they call him the broadcaster. They don't call him the enjoyer of child pornography. They never mention that. So we're still being gaslit. And Starmer, I can't believe that even the Labour Party want to see him still in power, because his biggest gaffe of all has been the handling of Southport. And when you see him, when he went to Southport, he didn't even speak, he didn't make a speech. No wonder, because he would have had more information at that time about the background of this despicable, insane beast of a boy who decided to kill and maim people that day. It was a frenzied attack. He tried to get as many as he could. And this is a man who's been sat at home looking at propaganda from Al-Qaeda and working on biological weapons, from what we're told. So I watched Mehdi and I thought, your arrogance is so unpalatable for me, because like us, you should have kept quiet. Why could you come out and defend the indefensible? Because you were wrong. You were wrong. And Nick Robinson, the BBC journalist, also, Matt Goodwin showed two clips from Nick Robinson, radio clips. But again, they couldn't wait to jump in and defend the insane attacker. Because obviously at this stage in the game, we're still looking at pictures of a little schoolboy in a nice bright blue blazer with a clean shirt on, smiling away, poster boy for the BBC Children in Need. The BBC gets so much wrong. So that's what we're given at the time to digest. And yet 3 months later, it comes out that we were on the right track. We spotted it. And we spotted it because we see it. We live among it. We know what's going on. We have social media to share information. This is why they want to get hold of X. This is why they want to shut X down, PDQ, because that is really the home of free speech. YouTube is a great platform which I'm enjoying because I can do longer videos and hopefully cover topics that matter. But credit to Matt Goodwin. He's an academic. He's not a fighter. He's not a street boy. He wants to get his message across, and he continually goes to these debates, which takes an awful lot of bottle. It's all right for me sat here at home. I can go and put my kettle on when I've done this, take my dog out. I'm not sat watching an audience of hostile people who are waiting to prove me wrong. But they didn't get the last laugh, did they, if you want to call it that? It was Matt Goodwin who was proved right, along with many other people. So for me, Starmer has to go. This man is not capable of running the country, because any man, he jumped the gun and went to protect the element of society we're complaining about. He did that first. What you've got to look at is what a different climate it would have been if your Prime Minister had come out on that podium that night and said, Britain will not tolerate this. There is no room in our society for this type of heinous crime, a pointless, thoughtless attack. We'll make sure that our children are protected. He didn't say anything like that. He couldn't wait to use the reaction to the attack as a battering ram to shut people down. And when you've got a man that's prepared to handle a situation where people who have written things online are treated worse than criminals, and they are being treated worse than criminals because they're in jail for things they wrote online. They haven't killed anyone. They haven't attacked anyone. No one's got a bloody nose because they've listened to that. And yet you've got a Labour councillor who's simply been suspended from the Labour Party with pay because he was asking for people to actually have their throats cut. He's just suspended. The Manchester attackers have been afforded a press conference, and their trial is postponed until early next year. And this is why people think it's a two-tier society, because it is. And the society itself sees the problem. The people running the society are trying to shut it out. They're in denial. It's very dangerous for them to admit it, because to admit that we've got it right tells the world that they've got it wrong, very wrong. And it shows their mistakes and their flaws and their foul intentions up for what they are. So we have to keep talking about this. And I will always talk about the little girls and the lives that were ruined, and the victims of the grooming gangs that have probably ended up on drugs or can't get jobs or nervous conditions because they've been battered from pillar to post. Remember back then we had a society that arrested a 12-year-old girl for being drunk and disorderly after various numbers of males had passed around in an empty house. I think it was Bradford or Manchester. That we had a society then that tried to blame the children. What sort of message does that send out? Well, to me, if I was a member of a grooming gang, I think it was okay to get on with it. Well, it isn't. It's a foul thing that you're doing. It's foul what you're doing. It's evil. There's something wrong with you if you have to do that to get sexual gratification. Something disgustingly wrong. And you will always be seen like that by any logical member of society. So we have to keep talking about these things, because we mustn't forget that there is always hope for change. And now that Keir Starmer is in power, the foulness of the way we've been treated is on display in front of the world. And the people that are sitting in jail cells now will at least have an audience of people watching what's going on with them. I'm amazed our society has come to this, where we cannot depend on the Home Office, the Prime Minister, the police force to defend what they ought to be defending. Instead, the goal has been to talk about the reaction to the problem rather than solving the problem. And that is never going to work.